for us to solve your technical woes that way. Now, some of you may have joined this evening simply to listen to the pair of Austrian wine and food buffs talk. Others of you may have bought some of the 4 wines that we suggested. And some of you may have even gone to the effort of preparing or buying in some of the food pairings. I'm jealous for anyone who's gone to town. I've got a sort of salmon ceviche-esque dinner that's going to hopefully go with my Wachau Grüne Veltliner later. And I've cheated. And I've got some canard saucisson rather than cooking an entire duck. And I'm going to try and pair that with my Saint Laurent later. But if you haven't bought in any wines or organised the food, then please don't worry. We really hope that this informative evening will be informal as well as informative and can be enjoyed without the culinary props. It should give you some great insight into some food and wine matching tips from somebody who's had rather a lot of experience. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Freddy Bulmer, who's going to introduce our guest for the evening. So I better get a wine. Cheers, Freddy.
Cheers, Anna. Thank you. Yes, thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited to talk to Stefan about the wines that we've got, the foods that we've got. I've already seen a couple of fantastic comments. Somebody enjoying the Society's Blau Frankish with the pasta dish, which is a great way to kick off. Stefan, I'm going to embarrass you now. You've got probably one of the best CVs in wine in the UK. So for those who haven't come across Stefan before, so Stefan's Austrian-born sommelier who moved to work at the 2 Michelin-starred Le Manoir in 2008. Fantastic place. In fact, this is essentially going to be a list of my bucket list restaurants. He then moved to the 3 Michelin-starred The Fat Duck as a sommelier. Was there for about 3 years before moving to the 2 Michelin-starred Dinner by Heston Blumenthal, where he was made head sommelier in 2015, and then director of wine in 2018, before moving on to Pastures New this year. Stefan is an ambassador for Krug Champagne since 2015, and in 2017 became a master sommelier. So there's really not many master sommeliers in the world. So I mean, that alone is incredibly impressive. So really, there's nobody more qualified to talk about Austrian food and wine pairing in the country, I think it's safe to say. So Stefan now works for a wine agency called Fells, who we work with a lot of the Wine Society, fantastic business, as a hospitality consultancy. And for those of you who haven't seen it yet, Stefan's written a fantastic article for us about matching Austrian wine with food and why it's just so versatile, which goes into a nice bit of detail. So do check that out. So Stefan, thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm really looking forward to getting stuck in.
Freddy, great to see you. Has been a while, and last time we saw each other in flesh, which was brilliant as well. Tasting lots of wine this time on the Austrian wine, which is brilliant too, and with international cuisine. Exactly. So yeah, welcome to all the members. Great to see that some already popped the bottles here and got stuck in the kitchen and did some pasta dishes. Great to hear.
Perfect. So we've got a handful of wines to kind of talk through. The way that we're going to do it, folks, is it's going to be, very informal, hopefully very interesting. I'm looking forward to learning lots of new things from Stefan. The 4 wines that we've got to sort of run through are the Domaine Wachau Steinfeder Neisenlos Grüne Veltliner, which you can see there, number 1. We'll kick off with that first. We're then going to go on to Rhine West Grüne Veltliner. We've got the Society's Blau Frankish, which I've also got here, and I've heard somebody's tucking into already, which is great. And then we have Saint Laurent from Stift Kloster Neuburg. So we're going to run through those, but what we also want to do is make it as useful and informative for everyone as possible. So as much as we're going to be tasting these wines, we're also going to be talking slightly more generally as well about these styles of wines and what makes them so food friendly, I suppose. So Stefan, have you got a glass of the Domaine Wachau Grüner here?
Of course.
Of course, silly question. So, I mean, just as a very brief bit of background, this is a wine that we actually only started working with fairly recently, although we've worked with Domaine Wachau for the last few years. They make some fantastic wines. Stefan, you probably know them better than most. What are your impressions of the winery, first and foremost?
Well, I worked with them a little bit before as well. I did a couple of tasting events back in 15 and 16, where we did international comparisons of the Grüner Veltliner and Riesling versus others. And they are extremely supportive for hospitality and very supportive for sommeliers as well. They actually host every year sort of a sommelier festival, sommelier day, where they invite sommeliers from around Austria just for educational purposes to get together and to do a few blends. They do like a sommelier edition blend. So they're really into getting feedback from people who are selling their wine. And you've got Roman Herbert, which is a master of wine, which is working for them as well. So they've got really some in-house experts. And I think it's such an important producer for the region itself as well, because Domaine Wachau is essentially the local cooperative. And not quoting too many other people which don't work for the Wine Society, but Jancis Robinson always used to say it's the world's best cooperative. And I'm not sure if she has got a point, but I would disagree with Miss Jancis, because I think she's a wonderful woman. And I think, when you try Domaine Wachau wines, they do from the entry level to the top, the attention to detail is really, truly impressive.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, the quality of wines that they make there are fantastic, and actually they're home to some of the best value wines in the Wachau, for sure. I mean, it's obviously a region which is famously home of some of Austria's finest wines and most expensive wines. But actually, I mean, this comes in under £10, and that's seldom seen in that part of Austria. I guess the key thing to talk about, Stefan, with these first two wines is the grape, Grüner Veltliner.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's almost, where do you start with Grüner Veltliner? I suppose it's a good idea to give people a little bit of an idea of what to expect from the grape. But then if you could tell us a little bit about what makes this grape in particular so food friendly.
Well, we can start at the beginning. Give or take, Austria's got 46,000 hectares planted for wines, and 30 to 31% of this is Grüner Veltliner. So a third of the vineyards is Grüner, which gives you really good breakdown what the country and some regions are really about. If you go to the area in particular, Wachau, but as well the neighboring areas like Kremstal or Kamptal, there's a lot of Grüner Veltliner planted in various different under various different soil conditions, very different exposures. So it's a variety which is hugely versatile. You do find it in a delicious, dry, still white wine style. You find it for sparkling wines. You find it for richer, more full-bodied expressions. You find it for sweet wines. It even found its sort of way into the natural wine scene. So it's a hugely versatile variety. And I think, from my personal opinion, the reason being is no matter where you plant Grüner, it really has that unique ability to absorb very well where it's grown. So you plant it on different types of soil with different exposures. Yeah. Even to a certain extent, different climatic differences. It really expresses very well where it's grown, and I think that's very unique. There's not many varieties which can do that. Yeah. So I think that's really from the beginning, and the style which we've got here today with Domaine Wachau is that wonderful sort of light, citrusy, refreshing, bone dry style, which is really appetizing. It's something which you can very comfortably have on your own on a sunny day on the terrace, if the British summer ever arrives, but you can very, very comfortably pair this with different food. And I think, without making this too complicated, because, for me, food and wine pairings should be always, not as straight as an arrow, but it should be straightforward. It's, there's one element which for me, for Grüner, always sort of sticks out and is dominant, which is that freshness, and that's essentially, technically speaking, the acidity. And, as soon as you pair something which is quite high in acidity, which Grüner Veltliner generally is, it always provides freshness, not only for you as a taster, but as well, it provides the freshness and that level of acidity for the dish. So I think that's maybe the one thing which I say, Grüner always delivers a really fresh, vibrant experience.
So one thing which is a rule that I often fall back on and rely on quite regularly when it comes to food and wine matching is the idea of, what grows together goes together, as they say. So normally, if in doubt, and you're having, I don't know, a pasta dish, you might go for something Italian, very broadly speaking. Mm-hmm. The exciting thing about Grüner Veltliner is that it is so diverse, and that's what's led us to doing this event, as what led us to your fantastic article that you've written for us. You've picked a ceviche dish, It'd be great if you could kind of expand on that a little bit, but then also give just a few other ideas of if in doubt, what Gruner Veltliner could quite easily pair with.
Well, I think you've got already one very, very good point here. What grows together normally goes together. I agree with this to 99%, except you would pair New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc with venison, then that doesn't work. But generally speaking, is a very, very, very good shout. And I think if you look at Austrian cuisine in general, and that's the reason why, of course, I picked then something more on the international style, but we generally like very much fish. It's very much part of our diet. We generally very much like things which, either marinated, and the ceviche for me is one of these examples which, I think one of the reasons why I love UK and London so much, because it's so multicultural.
Yeah.
And when I speak to my Mexican friends, which make a really delicious ceviche, and once you go to Peru, it's a bit of a different style. Everyone's got a sort of their own version of ceviche. But what essentially the core of a ceviche is always marinated with some sort of either lemon, lime, or any citrusy element there. And for me, this makes a good pairing for that reason, because you find this similarity. When you pick up like this classic Gruner Veltliner, you will have a citrusy element there. If this is not lemon, lime, or grapefruit, this is entirely up to you. This is how you perceive it. No one will tell you this is right or this is wrong. But there's certainly a citrusy element in a lot of Gruner Veltliners found. So that already builds the natural bridge between two components. The component in the dish where you have a lemon or lime element, and the same thing in the wine itself. And because we mentioned acidity is essentially something which cuts beautiful for richness of the dish. And as soon as you have a texture element there, like the fish, in this case, whatever fish you might use, just use your favorite or the fish which is currently available. In the case of Anna Spooner, she used salmon, for example. But sea bass makes a great pairing as well. So use a fish where we feel like, okay, that I like the taste of it. And then you can spice it up to that extent that you say, okay, maybe add a little bit of chili, maybe add some other spices to it, maybe add some herbs to it, like coriander. And I think, for me, Gruner Veltliner works for that reason as well, because what Gruner quite often has is a slightly herbal element there.
Yeah.
This could be, again, some sort of thing which you personally pick up, like maybe a bit of parsley, some chives, some coriander. But it certainly has a bit of an herbal, and as I mentioned this quite often, a bit of a vegetable thing. And for me, vegetable means more in a positive way, more like sort of an asparagus, but generally speaking, maybe more like white asparagus than green asparagus. Okay. So it has a more the sweetness of the style of the asparagus than the green side. So I think that works really good. And yeah. I think, if you focus on a few elements which are similar, there's not much what you can do wrong with a food and wine pairing.
No, I completely agree. I think it's a very exciting grape variety, because from a sommelier's point of view, it must be a bit of a dream grape, because when people are asking you, what's going to pair with this dish that I'm picking off the menu, then quite often Gruner Veltliner is going to work.
Yeah, it's a bit like your get out of jail card here, yes. Because it's the one which you pull when you run out of options. And I think, we've got here light style, but I'll just invite every member, and I think for you in particular at the Wine Society, you've got a great offering of Gruner Veltliners, in different styles and with different intensity levels. If you go for the richer styles of Gruner Veltliner, they quite comfortably can pair as well with richer styles of food.
Yeah.
And I think that's my opinion, and our Austrians have done something right with the labeling. It's normally quite straightforward. And the one thing which gives you a little bit of indication is quite often the alcohol content. If you see something with 11.5, you will know that this is something quite light, refreshing, zesty in terms of the style. If you see something which hits 13.5, you will get the idea that this is something on the more rich and more textural side.
Yeah, I completely agree. Actually, it's very, very useful indication, very useful guide. You can see here, someone behind the scenes, maybe Anna, has shared the page which demonstrates the wine that we're tasting currently, and this is a very nice light spritzy 11.5. And the next wine that we've got is another Gruner Veltliner from Rainer Wess, and I think it's really interesting tasting these two one after the other, because first it's great to actually really spend the time talking about Gruner and why it's such an exciting and versatile grape variety, but also to demonstrate the difference in style between the first and the next. So yeah, we could. Should we jump onto the next wine? What do you think?
I was just going to ask Freddie if it's all right with you. We have had a member question that probably is going to feed in really nicely to this, as if we planned it, but we didn't, because Brian Thomas has already written in. Obviously, we've just tried a wine from the Wachau. And, oh, pardon me, they have a classification system, and you'll have to excuse my pronunciation, Stefan. Steinfeder, Federspiel, and Schmaragd.
Schmaragd, very, very good. Impressive. It almost feels like that you've trained this.
No, I haven't. But Brian has said that Wachau has this classification system, and it's maybe easier to understand those wines. But in Kamptal and Kremstal, if they don't have that classification system, how do you understand the body of the wines? So I think if we can take a step back, maybe if you don't mind explaining the classification and then explaining sort of the different styles and how you can tell what style of Gruner to expect.
Absolutely. I mean, what you see here, Steinfeder. So Stein, if you translate that directly from German into English, it would mean stone. And Feder means the feather. Now, the direct translation doesn't really make sense. Why would you have a stone feather? But this is actually the local synonym or the local term for the grass which is grown. And it's a very fluffy, light grass which blows in the wind. And when you walk around that area, you will find this kind of grass all over Wachau, but it's essentially sort of reassembling a very light, citrusy, refreshing style. Then you've got the next level, which is Federspiel. And Federspiel by law needs to have an alcohol content between 11.5 to 12.5, and as well a minimum must weight, so essentially a minimum ripeness level. Where, for example, Steinfeder is limited to a maximum of 11.5. So regardless which producer you will pick up, Steinfeder will always be no more than 11.5%. Federspiel is referring essentially to a game which you play with the local birds or the falcons. So essentially you would have two people trying to play a game between the falcon, try to throw something in the air for the falcon to catch along that way. But essentially, this style is sort of that medium weight, 11.5 to 12.5. There are different versions of Federspiel around, depends very much on the expression and particular vineyard itself. But for me, it's always a good way of being very versatile, not too heavy, and very, very often as well unoaked. Not that oak is a big thing in the region itself. It's very much about large barrels. So we speak anything between 250 liter onwards to 2000 liters, and depends very much on the producer. But Federspiel is maybe a little bit richer than a Steinfeder and a bit softer and rounder in terms of the acidity. And then the last level, which is called Smaragd. Smaragd is normally a reference to the green lizards. The lizard essentially which is breeding in the warmest or hottest places. And this is normally the more premium styles of vineyards. And these are normally the terraced vineyards, where you find what we traditionally call Urgestein. So it's a type of soil which is either gneiss, it's essentially a type of granite, quite good heat retention. And normally lizards like to breed in these vineyards because it's quite warm. And Smaragd are normally the richest, most full-bodied expression, but as well very site-specific expressions. Now we can give an example for Reinhard Wess, which we try later. Reinhard Wess does, for example, a site expression which is called Achleiten. But generally speaking, these are normally the richest styles of wine. So how can you figure out if you go to Kamptal or to Kremstal, what kind of wine you're gonna get? Very, very simple, as a matter of fact. The less there is written on it, normally the more simple it is. So if there is just written Kamptal or Kremstal and nothing else, then that's general an indication for you that this is normally a blend of different vineyards from different sites, and it sort of reassembles a quite light style. As soon as you go into something more specific, a vineyard, for example, which is stated, then you will have actually the indication that this is normally from one site and something which is rich in terms of the expression. I've actually prepared something. I'm not sure if that fits in, but this is actually...
Oh my word.
This is a 12-liter bottle, and I'm not sure if everyone can see that, but this is a Riesling, and there's written Heiligenstein on it. And that's a specific vineyard expression. So it's a specific vineyard. And there's not many producers which do, for example, Heiligenstein, Schloss Gobbersburg, which you guys actually do an en primeur of every year. They, for example, produce a Riesling Ried Heiligenstein. Or if you go for Gruner, I've got, I'm surrounded by wine here. You've got, and I think I can hold this into the camera, you've got a specific vineyard here, which is written Lamm. Now imagine if there's nothing written on there, just Kamptal, that's normally an indication for quite a light style. As soon as it's vineyard specific, it gives you the indication that it's something which is of a more richer nature. And there's a term which I'm not quite understand sometimes why they're using it. I'm not a huge fan of that term. It's called reserve or reserve. So it's a quite often used term. The reason why I'm not so keen on that term is because it's a bit overused in the world of wine. But it gives you still an indication. It's a bit like when you go to Rioja and you've got your Gran Reserva or your Reserva, or you go to Chianti Classico Reserva. This again, as soon as there's written reserve, it will give you the indication, a richer expression with a minimum set alcohol and the minimum ripeness level.
Yeah, that's a really, really nicely summed up description there, actually, Stefan. I found that really, really interesting, actually. And you're right about the term reserve. It's something which is so overused in the wine world, and it's kind of it sort of means something but nothing at the same time in a very weird way.
Yeah, it's one of those terms where it gives you an indication but not much more. It's more important to actually maybe know the producer or know the people behind, which gives you much better sort of rundown what you can expect from it.
Well, I think that's very true, actually, moving into Rainer's Grüne Veltliner that we've got next, because what we have here is his sort of basic Grüne Veltliner, for want of a better term. His flagship is a much nicer way of putting it. So this is his creme style Grüne from 2020. And the thing that I like about his wines is two things, I suppose. Briefly going back to something that you mentioned earlier, which I think is so true of the grape variety, is how it reflects the vineyard, it reflects the place, and it also reflects the conditions uniquely. And Rainer's 2020 Grüne, I think, really captured the vintage. It was a much cooler vintage than 2019. And if you compare his 2020 wine that we've got here with the 2019, they're really quite different styles. The 19 is ripe and rich and full and generous, and the 2020 is all about precision and focus and acidity. But just touching on what you're saying there, Stefan, about knowing the producer, Rainer makes wines which are certainly at the top end of the single vineyards, full, concentrated, rich, spiced, really almost sort of Alsatian in style. With that type of Grüne, Stefan, what would you see being the possible kind of food matching options?
Well, there's a few, and I think this is the kind of Grüne which I really enjoy drinking, and I love Reinhard Wess and his daughter as well, which is helping him along the way now, Christina. So I think it's great to see when you have this power couple, two generations working, and can totally reflect they can totally embrace what Grüne is about. And I think the world is really an oyster here. You can do so many different things. So the one thing which I personally pointed out, and I absolutely love this kind of food, it's Cantonese Dim Sum. And it's I'm slightly spoiled by this because my wife is originally from Hong Kong. So there she makes some homemade dim sum and some homemade dumplings, and they're just, of course it's my wife, so I have to say they are to die for, but they're generally delicious. And till to this date, I still struggle with all the pronunciation and all the names, but the reason why actually, general, if you're interested in this, it's always just one click away from a good takeaway menu. And if you really go into town, like you go to Yaocha in the city, and Yaocha is a quite famous one-star. They have one in Soho as well, or if you go to Shepherd's Bush, there's Shikumen, which is a really, really good place, and Hakkasan as well. That's really, really good dim sum. So Grüne works for that reason quite well, because now imagine Austrian cuisine. Anyone who's ever been to Austria, we love dumplings. We in different forms and shapes, and we love doughs, different types of doughs. Thick, thin, we use them for savory dishes, we use them for sweet dishes, for any, lots used in the pastry. So we make, for example, a lot of sweet dumplings, like apricot dumplings. But especially when you have something which has a slightly chewy texture, and that's now referring to the dough, or the filling itself. You know, we for example have a lot of pork in Austria. So if you take traditional dim sum dumplings, they quite often have either a pork or a prawn filling or some sort of seafood filling in there, which makes it great to pair with it, you know, because it just has enough body to cut for the richness, but the texture element. Because in the end of the day, I wouldn't say I can't stress this enough, you know, but in the end of the day, when you pick up a glass of wine and you eat, you're not going to eat and smell that wine, because that's going to be quite complicated doing that. So what you're going to do is you're going to focus on the texture of the wine. And I think that's one of the most important things for a successful food and wine pairing, because as I said, smelling and eating normally doesn't result in a lot of pleasure. So you really want to focus on what the depth, the layers, the complexity, and the texture element of a wine is. And I think when you have Gruner, which has a little bit more of physiological ripeness there, this is beautifully delivered there.
Yeah, completely agree actually. And I just get very excited about the options when it comes certainly to this type of Gruner. I'd say Reiner's Gruners in particular are very sort of gastronomic. You know, they are almost designed to go with food, certainly at that top end, you know, the single vineyard things, and far less sophisticated, I know, but one of my favorite things to have that slightly richer style of Gruner Veltliner with is pork belly, with the crackling and everything. I just
Absolutely.
works so nicely, because in some ways, as much as you don't have, you know, it's not a sweet wine, it's a full concentrated wine, but it's not a sweet wine. But in some ways, it works, I find, with pork the same way that apple sauce might work with pork. It cuts through it. It's got enough concentration to hold up against the pork flavors, but has that acidity that focuses through it. Would you say I'm along the right path here? I mean,
no, you're absolutely along the right path there. And the thing is, the only trouble is I'm getting already hungry now. I'm only on wine number 2.
I know. I'm hoping that people who are at home and who've got the food are really enjoying it.
I hope so too. The other thing, I mean, I would just put out there, and which is, you know, you go to Spain and you have many different versions of paella, but, you know, imagine a paella where quite often saffron is used, and not only as a coloring, but as a flavor element there. As soon as you have saffron, that works quite good for Gruner and for riper styles of Gruner as well, because again, you've got sometimes a certain spicy element in Gruner, which is perfectly normal. We always talk about this sort of peppery thing going on there. I'm not always sure if I get pepper, but it certainly has a spicy element there. And again, you find a similarity between the dish and the wines. It naturally makes a good combination. And I think general rice dishes, in particular, when you take a classic example as well, chicken tikka masala, you know, it's like something where you play with the sweetness, and that works really good for Gruner as well, because it is an aromatic variety, which is generally always vinified dry. We don't make any off-dry styles. That's very important to point out. But what Gruner has, and I personally call this sort of a fruit sweetness, it's the ripeness of fruit which you get, is the intensity of fruit, and it's the fruits itself. So, for example, white peaches, apricots, sometimes riper styles of apples, quince. This is all very often which you get in Gruner. So these fruits, when you have a yellow apple or a red apple, it's certainly sweeter than a green apple. Yeah. So I think this is maybe the comparison I would draw here. Gruner with a little bit more ripeness. Don't be shy, pair it with something, and very, very comfortably pair it with something which is spicy, like hot spicy.
And it's such a hard thing to pair with as well. There's a few things which in the food and wine matching world are famously tricky, and spice is one of those things. And you know, normally people might say, well, actually the thing that works well with spice is Riesling, off-dry Riesling, and absolutely it does. But it's worth just saying, don't forget about Gruner as well, because it can work so nicely. Anything that is, has a bit of heat, and certainly an aromatic spice as well. It's just the perfect, great variety.
It works really well. And I mean, I think, for example, we talk a lot about Gruner Veltliner, and it's such a versatile variety, but as well Roter Veltliner, which is not related to Gruner Veltliner in any way. It's a different variety, but it has as well the capability quite comfortably to stand up to something which is hot or warm spice in terms of the style. So, the thing is, I love Riesling, don't get me wrong, and I love off-dry styles of Riesling as well.
Yeah.
But, there's a moment where you want something dry, or at least dry tasting.
Yeah.
And then there is pretty much not many varieties where you can safely choose. And for me, Gruner is one of them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Stefan. So that's a couple of delicious whites. We should probably move on to some reds, unless Anna's going to pop up. I mean, we have had what I think is quite a nice question that we could actually answer now, provided that's okay with Anna, very quickly about Gruner from Steve Cropper. Can Gruner work like, say, a sauterne as an aperitif right through the meal? What would you say to that?
Absolutely, without any problem. I think if I may point one thing out there, which we haven't really touched before, and I think that makes great pairings, and what makes a great aperitif is as well. It's the most important thing is almost like having a good glass and temperature.
Yeah.
When you traditionally, and I love this, and I have very good memories about that. When once upon a time, when I was able to travel. And I was going to France, you get a glass of Sauterne, and it's always a chilled glass of Sauterne. It's like sits maybe in that sort of 7 to 10 degree bracket. Temperature is so important. So if you serve something as an aperitif, as a pre-dinner drink, let's stick with the English term pre-dinner drink, then it's temperature is so important. And like the glass which you personally enjoy, the glass which you like. I mean, it seems like you have a Salto there.
I've got Zalto, yeah.
Yeah, I voted 100% Austrian. That's the Riedel Gruner Veltliner glass.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, I was doing quite well. Zalto is also Austrian, but I'm universal here.
Oh, very good, very good. But yeah, long story on short answer, yes, it absolutely works.
Perfect, thank you, Stefan. So let's go on to a couple of reds. We're going to kick off with the Society's Blaufränkisch. So this is a wine that we are now in our second vintage of. So we didn't launch it all that long ago, really. I introduced this to the range just because I have just been increasingly excited about Austrian reds, quite frankly. My predecessor and colleague, Sarah Knowles, launched the Society's Gruner Veltliner a few years ago. That must have been back in 2013 or something now, actually. And that was very well received, and quite rightly so. I mean, the wine is delicious and continues to be to this day. But I just felt like the quality of the reds is just continuing to improve. I mean, it's just absolutely fantastic. There's this lovely, crunchy vibrancy about these wines. So I thought it'd be really fun to add an Austrian red to our Society range. So this comes from a winery called Hans Igler, who are in the Mittelburgenland, which is right near the Hungarian border. In fact, somebody actually mentioned it in the chat earlier, and I was very impressed with the knowledge there. So yes, quite rightly, a very short distance, stone's throw from the Hungarian border. And this is sort of Blaufränkisch land, really. So Stefan, maybe you could give us a bit of a background on Blaufränkisch as a grape variety.
There's one of these varieties which I think Austria has. The Austrians sometimes don't realize how lucky they are having this variety. And over the last decades, we've experimented a lot with Blaufränkisch around, and you do find it in other parts. And as so correctly pointed out before, Keck-Frankos in Hungary. And you look at that landscape, you look at Mittelburgenland, you look at in general Burgenland. Burgenland as an area, not only it's very, very close to Hungary, but there's a lot of similarities in terms of the cuisine, in terms of the people. There's a lot of family ties in between those two countries. And I think personally, like the area around Sopron makes some very, very good Keck-Frankos, absolutely delicious. And you have actually sometimes winemakers which own vineyards in Austria and in Hungary. This just shows you how much respect they have for both of the countries and for both of the terroirs or both of the vineyards itself. And Blaufränkisch itself, you find it in various different forms and shapes. But I think in general, Blaufränkisch is a variety which generally rewards you if you give it time. It's something which it really likes sometimes decanting. It's generally always the one which you pour in the glass and you let it come to you. It's a savory style. It's not something which always jumps out of the glass like other varieties do. It's the one which delicately approaches you and sort of takes you gently over than by force. I think Blaufränkisch is one of these varieties where, you know, you find, I have to say, thankfully, you find them now much more wider planted than before, and there's a big replanting, and you find some very old vineyards as well. But the variety itself, you know, all over Europe, Eastern Europe, Austria, Slovenia, Czech Republic, is a very popular variety because itself, you know, although it's quite susceptible to diseases, is a naturally low yielding variety. So it always packs a lot of flavors naturally into the wine. So even at an entry level point of view for Blaufränkisch, you get actually a lot of wine for it. And again, what it does, it has general quite naturally high acidity, and it maintains even in hot climates or in warm climates its acidity very, very well. I have to say, when you go to this area in Austria, which is Mittelburgenland, Neusiedlersee, and Südburgenland, it's warm to / hot. You would not believe, actually. I mean, to give a bit of a breakdown there, we talk about 2,400 hours of sunshine a year. So that's the equivalent to some parts of Italy, Spain, Greece. So it's a warm and / hot area, and it's flat, very windy, very good actually for windsurfing as well. But anyhow, I mean, the variety itself, it likes warmth and it likes heat. You can quite comfortably take that. You know, for me, what you've done very well with selecting particular Hans Igler, because Hans Igler is always about freshness, purity, and as I mentioned before, that lovely savory note which is noticeable there.
Yeah, it's well, there's a couple of things I want to just come back to on that actually. For the first thing that I just wanted to say is I'm really enjoying more and more frequently, I should say, seeing Austrian winemakers in that part of the country focusing on fresh, vibrant fruit rather than oak, because I think there's still a little bit of a hangover from perhaps an old-fashioned style of making the reds in that part of the country, where they saw what was happening in Bordeaux, let's say, and it was about lots of oak and flashy wines. And there's a little bit of that still, but actually what I really enjoy, and I think what this wine hopefully captures, is the fruit, you know, the freshness of the fruit. And you're quite right, it's a grape variety which does demand a little bit of time. And that, I think, can be interpreted in different ways at different levels. So the more premium Blaufränkisch, so for example, we work with Birgit Braunstein, as I think you know, Stefan, her wines are super, and what I find is that they really benefit from time in bottle.
Absolutely.
You know, decanting, of course, but just time in bottle. She releases them quite late, and they soften, because as a grape, in my experience, I've found that when it's young, it can be quite tough. It's like a tough ball of licorice in some ways. But then with time, it softens and opens up beautifully. But at this level, this sort of entry level, I mean, just from my point of view, having put this under the society label, what I liked about it was that actually it's approachable young. I mean, this is only 2019, but you pour it in the glass, and you're quite right, Stefan. You need to give it a bit of time in the glass, and it then just opens up slowly. And what's nice is that it changes every time you go back to it. So it's such a fascinating grape for those.
I think one of the most joyful things in the world of wine is if you can see something developing, and if you see something which naturally opens up. And I think the beauty is when you smell your glass the first time, and you be like, oh, this is good. You smell it the second time, you say, oh, this is even better.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the third time you say, oh God, I mean, I'm knocking on heaven's door. I mean, this is the fascinating thing about, you know, I think Blaufränkisch as a grape can deliver that. You know, this is the joy of what you get in the glass. If it's the standard box wine where it will taste regardless if it's 6 hours decanted or 6 seconds open the same, it's a bit boring. But what Blaufränkisch actually does manage really well is that balance of having an immediate charm, but rewarding you even more if you give it a bit of time, either in the bottle or in the glass. And I think Birgit Braunstein as a producer, I visited her many, many years ago. Really fascinating what she does. She does excellent white wines as well, but her Blaufränkisch, you know, give them a bit of time. I'd have to be a little bit biased here. I mean, I absolutely love her wines. And I think, you know, you put them with a few years of bottle age against some of the best wines in the world, and whatever best may be, or some of your favorite wines in the world, and you'd be like, hang on, they are very, very good. What's going on here? This is from Austria. What's wrong here, you know?
Absolutely. I notice Anna has popped up, which means that there's
a question.
Go on.
There is a question, but there's actually first something I just wanted to clarify. We're obviously talking about the aging of Blaufränkisch here. One member has spotted that at the moment our new website says drinking now. I'll just flash it up for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's worth saying, members, that one of today's teething problems on the website has been that we're not giving you the full window. And Freddie, you have selected the year 2024 to drink this too, I believe. We've just done a bit of digging.
Yeah.
So members can keep hold of this wine and let it age in the bottle for a bit.
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, this is certainly a style which I selected because it is drinking really nicely from the word go, basically. I mean, obviously the winery keeps it for a little while because we've just, we're on the 2019 now. And, this is a style which I think is all about the freshness, the youthful fruit. It's not necessarily a wine that I would buy to put away and approach again in a few years. However, there's also no rush. If you buy a case and then you find that actually, I've still got a couple of bottles of that I'd forgotten about, then there's absolutely no problem whatsoever, I'd say.
Yeah, if in doubt, you can always have a look at the Wine Society vintage chart, as we've got it here, in case you want to find out what's drinking now and what you can keep. But we just need to put Austria on there, Fred.
Yes, we do. We'll get there one day. So Stefan, just we've been so excitedly talking about Blaufränkisch that we haven't actually talked yet about the food pairing for it. So
yeah, I think we covered it slightly in the beginning with the pasta, but there's much more which you can do. Yeah. Yeah,
absolutely. So you suggested the kind of the tomatoey, classically Italian pasta, or was it a classic French cassoulet otherwise? What is it about those two dishes and this style of wine that you think works so well together?
Well, I think in general stews, like traditional cassoulet where you have beans, works really well with it, because essentially it's that savory element of the wine which is there, but as well that freshness, but at the same time the weight it delivers. I mean, there's a few things which I can highlight. For me, pasta dishes in particular, when you talk now about tomatoes itself, they always have a very savory, but as well a umami-like element. So umami taste itself, which you normally get in the mid part of your tongue. There's a few ingredients in the world which deliver lots of umami flavors, and I generally think umami and Blaufränkisch is a good combination, because you do find a certain savory character and a certain umami flavor in good Blaufränkisch. And there's always a bit of you mentioned the word licorice before, there's a natural spicy character in the wine. It's not something which arrives as a secondary aroma. So from the winemaking side of things, it's a primary aroma. So it naturally arrives from the variety, it arrives from the grape itself. So there's no winemaking influence as such. It's purely what the grape itself delivers and provides. And I mean, I could think of a few other dishes which I think would work very well. I mean, I have a few Brazilian friends which, excuse my pronunciation, is called feijoada, which is a black bean stew with smoked pork. And there's different versions depending where you go, but in general, black beans or beans and stews where you've actually quite rich flavors and something where you have, again, we talked about pork before. Pork, obviously, there's a little bit of, the good old fat on there. And even if it's reduced and it adds so much flavor to the stew, I think that works for Blaufränkisch really well. So I would generally say something for which you braise for a long period of time works really well for Blaufränkisch.
That sounds absolutely delicious. We should go, I'm excited to go on to the second red. Anna, was there
squeeze one more question in? Yeah. Sorry, Freddie. You obviously mentioned oaked versus unoaked versions of Blaufränkisch, and we have had a member question from Steve Cropper, who's asked, would you, Stefan, do you have a view on how an oak style of Blaufränkisch would match food differently? Is there
in general, when we talk about oak in Austria, Freddie touched that point already before. We did a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, maybe the Austrian wine marketing is listening here, but we did a few mistakes in the past where we used maybe a little bit too much oak. And when we say oak, we mean predominantly new oak, small French barrel, 225 liter, your classic barrique. And the trend over the last years has been using oak more as a supportive element than a dominating element. What I want to say, it supports more the fruit, the structural elements of the wine, than dominating it and adding a lot of, oak arrived or oak driven flavors to the wine. And there's certainly a difference. For me, Blaufränkisch, when they are young, when they are juicy, when they are fresh, I would serve them, first of all, slightly chilled, and I would pair them maybe with something which is more like a charcuterie style. As soon as there's a little bit more oak involved, and we talk here again about large oak barrels, so there's some producers which would never use new, they use 500 liters and above, and we've got some Austrian Coopers as well, which do provide us with some really, really great oaks, like Stockinger, for example. As soon as you hit the richer style of Blaufränkisch, don't shy away of providing it as well with richer styles of flavors. When I mentioned before the black bean stew in Brazil, don't put a too light Blaufränkisch for this. Is put something which stands up to the flavor. What I want to say with this, you have a richer dish, you want to put something in an equal amount of body against it. So something which can stand up, but is not overpowering it. And as well, a bit of an indication would be potentially the vintage, as we mentioned before. Warmer vintages generally deliver a bit more lusher styles of wine, where cooler vintages deliver more wines which have maybe a certain herbal quality to it, and maybe a certain green bell pepper component there, or something which has less ripeness itself. So I think as soon as you hit the richer styles of Blaufränkisch, don't be shy.
Good advice. There was just a comment I just wanted to very briefly touch upon before we go on to the next wine, which was about the fact that we haven't talked about any Austrian food with these wines, and I just wanted to say that was quite intentional, really, because I mean, I guess first of all, in the UK, we're slightly starved of Austrian food to a certain extent. Anyway, there's not that many Austrian takeaways around. So I was really quite keen to get across the point that these wines are so versatile when it comes to food pairing. And I think it's actually something which is particularly unique, if you can be particularly unique, is particularly special about Austrian wine, is just the sheer amount of options that you've got when it comes to food pairing. So we thought, let's not just focus on Austrian food here, because that's a bit of a given. We could sum that up fairly quickly. I mean, like we said earlier, what grows together goes together. And actually, with most Austrian dishes, well, if not all Austrian dishes, really, there's going to be one of the wines that we've had tonight that's going to pair with those.
Most likely, yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, the reason why we chose as well a bit the international cuisine here, and I personally focused a bit on the article to show the versatility of Austrian wine on an international stage, and the production of Austrian wine on an international stage is minuscule. We don't really produce much. Very little which goes actually into the export market. And maybe worth pointing out that the Austrian cuisine and the Austrian country itself, yes, it's very small, it's around 7.5-ish million people. There is a lot of international, or there was a lot of influence from other countries. And if you go back in history, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was relatively large, let's put it like this. The Wiener Schnitzel, a very classic Austrian dish, works really good for Grüne Veltliner, there's no doubt about it. Also, the Italians were slightly responsible for developing it. So we need to give them a little bit of credit for that. But what I want to say, a lot of the influence from, for example, from our pastry side of things and the sweet side of things, and as well a lot of savory dishes, they had a lot of influence from actually the surrounding countries. So it's somehow submerged all now into small little Austria. But before, with the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, the influence of different countries was much, much larger.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I mean, that's a topic that we could talk about on its own for hours. So, should we go on to the Sanderon, the last of the 4 wines that we've got this evening? So, this is from Stift Kloster Neuburg. So, apologies for the pronunciation there. If that's
perfect.
Thank you. And I'll let Stefan talk a bit about the grape variety, but just as a bit of background, this is Austria's oldest winery and actually is home to the oldest winemaking school in the world, as far as I'm aware, which I found very, very interesting.
Yeah.
But again, they are a winery that has vineyards in lots of different areas, but they make some very, very good value wines, this being one of them. So I thought the lovely thing about this wine is how it really is a great example of the juicy, vibrant value that Austrian wine can offer. I mean, it's not just all about premium, expensive wines. So, Stefan,
Absolutely.
can you give us a bit of background on Saint Laurent as a grape variety, please?
Yeah, St. Laurent is a really interesting variety, and it's not very widely planted in Austria. We talk about 5% of the total plantings. So Blaufränkisch, for example, has more. Zweigelt as a variety is the sort of equivalent to Grüne Veltliner, is the most planted red varieties, Blauer Zweigelt or Zweigelt. St. Laurent really takes a minor part. And the reason being because St. Laurent, we know the parentage not precisely. We know it is related to Pinot Noir. There was a question from a member as well on the thoughts of Pinot Noir from Bründelmeier. Very, very good Pinot Noir, by the way. But if you like Pinot Noir, St. Laurent is sort of a very, very good, not alternative, but it sort of reassembles Pinot Noir in a different way. So we know that one parent of Pinot Noir, of St. Laurent, is Pinot Noir. We're not entirely sure about the other one. I personally always describe Pinot Noir, St. Laurent as a variety which is a little bit more powerful and a little bit sort of a powered up version of Pinot. So you get a lot of these red fruits, driven elements, sort of these riper cherries, riper strawberries, raspberries. But with St. Laurent, you always get a certain floral element there and a certain spicy note. And if you, I mean, it's always very hard to see through a screen, but if you buy a bottle of this, which I would highly encourage you to do so, it's always, St. Laurent is really light in terms of the color. It's marginally darker than a Pinot Noir, but when you taste the wine, when you smell the wine, it always has a little bit more of a richness and a bit more body to it. I'm not saying the one is complexer than the other, they are different in terms of the style, but St. Laurent as a variety needs something which I like to call TLC, so a bit of tender loving care. It needs a capable hand in the vineyard and in the winery in order to express its best. And because, you know, we all know Pinot Noir is a bit of a diva of a variety as well. And a good Pinot Noir does take a lot of time. St. Laurent isn't so different. So it certainly inherited a part from one parent of being not the easiest variety to handle in a vineyard, but it can be very rewarding in the glass. It has a very soft, very velvety structure.
It's a really delicious, lesser known grape variety for sure. And it's interesting, the comparison to Pinot Noir, because of course, Pinot is a grape variety which is famously hard to find good examples of under £10, let's say. There's a comment saying actually Pinot or Gamay ? And there's certainly notes to Gamay there as well, that lovely sort of primary fruit character. And of course, you know, it's a grape which perhaps doesn't have the finesse of Pinot Noir, but does offer a really good taste of actually a very accomplished or sophisticated wine style at a price that's seldom seen for Pinot, which I think makes it quite exciting. Going on to the food pairing for this one, you've mentioned duck breast, which is one of my favorite things that I hardly ever eat. and you also mentioned, particularly if it's got a sort of a cherry-based sauce. So what are the elements that you're looking at in the wine that you think make that such a good pairing? And for people who might not have duck breast all the time, because it's something that I have as a treat, very rarely, and I love it. What else might you recommend with it too?
So first of all, we should change your intake of duck breast.
Yes.
So the next time when we see each other, I shall cook a duck breast for you, Freddy.
That'd be lovely.
But I think, you know, what makes a good pairing, St. Laurent, and I would extend this as well, St. Laurent and Pinot Noir make in general a good pairing for duck. And there's a couple of reasons for this. I always look, when I look at food and wine pairing, the first thing you need to have, if you're at home, you need to have a selfish approach. If you are in the restaurant, you think about your guests. Now, what I mean with this, you should always drink something which you enjoy drinking, hands down. And the first step for successful pairing is finding a similarity. And the other one is looking at the most dominating element of either the dish or the wine. Now, if you take St. Laurent, you know, is a quite aromatic variety. We mentioned this sort of cherry or red fruit flavor before. So I think, in particular, St. Laurent delivers this in different levels. It could be sort of more dry cherries. It could be sort of macerated, sweet, cooked cherries. But there's certainly a thing which is going on in terms of red fruits.
Okay.
So traditionally speaking, I could quite extend this to plums as well. It's something which I get quite frequently there. But I think it's the softness of the tannins. If you take duck breast, it's a very tender piece of meat. You get that sweetness from the duck skin, but a perfectly cooked duck breast should technically melt in your mouth. You shouldn't be able almost to cut it, it melts in your mouth. And I think this is looking at the texture element of St. Laurent is a similar thing. It's a very soft, very mellow, very velvety style of a wine. So you not only have a similarity in terms of flavor, not only a similarity in terms of the texture element, but more importantly, you drink something which you enjoy drinking or which you enjoy eating. So no one should tell you otherwise.
Yes, quite right. That's, I think, the most important thing. Having talked for a while about all the intricacies of Austrian food and wine matching, drink something that you like drinking, eat something that you like eating is always the best thing to fall back on.
Absolutely.
Stefan, thank you so much for this. I have found this absolutely fascinating. I don't know about everyone else. I mean, I've been having a great time just listening to you. It's been fantastic. Everybody who's been chatting away in the comment section, thank you for contributing. There's been some wonderful bottles of wine that you've all been drinking. It's nice to see so many top Austrian wines being opened in one go. If you haven't had a chance yet, do check out Stefan's article on our website. It's well worth a read. There's a few bits that we've covered this evening, plus a lot more as well. It's fantastic. And I guess the thing that we can take away from this is, if in doubt, when it comes to food and wine matching, pick something Austrian. I mean, the possibilities are endless. So, Stefan, I'm going to hand back over to Anna, but I just want to say fantastic. Thank you so much. It's been fantastic. It's been brilliant. So cheers to you, and handing over to Anna.
Yes, absolutely. I'd like to second that, Stefan. It's very rare we get such an expert on food and wine matching, and we try our best in the tastings team, but there are so many little nuggets that I'm going to go away with, and hopefully, our members' lunches and dinners and all sorts will be even more improved with Stefan's wise guidance. So members, I hope you found some nuggets yourselves. I also hope that for those of you who bought the wines, you have enjoyed them. I can certainly see some comments saying that is the case. We've just popped the Austrian wine link in the chat, but fear not, members, I will send a link with all the wines we discussed this evening, as well as a link to the article in a follow-up email tomorrow morning, alongside as well a link to the recording, because I think a lot of people will come back, rewatch this, maybe cook one of the dishes and retry it with one of the dishes. So hopefully get even more out of this evening than just tonight's session. So again, Freddie, thank you so much for hosting. Stefan, thank you. And thank you to Tim and Catherine behind the scenes. And cheers to all.
See you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.